I think there's definitely certain Feng Shui principles and concepts that can and should be used throughout architecture. And at the same time, it can also be very logical, because
Mm-hmm.
Feng Shui is based on the natural world, the
Mm-hmm.
interaction of the natural world, and the operation of the natural world and the flow of energies.
Welcome to Home Green Homes podcast. My name is Izumi Tanaka. I am a green realtor and a podcaster. I have been exploring the idea of how in what we consider healthy homes or green homes, some ancient traditions interact with modern systems in today's home building and designs. Larson is a wellness real estate agent and wellness design consultant. She combines a wide range of expertise in what makes a home healthy and sustainable, incorporating principles such as Feng Shui, biophilic design, land resilience, and material health. While I'm sure these old and new principles all complement each other, I was particularly interested in how she applies Feng Shui in her practice. Here's my conversation with Elle. So Elle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Azumi.
Yes,
Hello,
so
everybody.
yes, I am honored to have you. So let's just dive right in and tell me, when you say what your website says wellness real estate and wellness design consulting. So um, I have some good idea because obviously I'm a real estate agent and I have been doing this podcast for a long time. Now I think this is for 4 years already. And in recent times, I have been really digging into what a green home means, and how, and I am really getting more aware of the term healthy homes or wellness real estate. So I've been kind of following that thread of what that can mean. So tell me how you define the wellness real estate and design.
Yeah, so there's a few different aspects of wellness real estate. So some have been in play for, 20, 30 years or more. I mean, you could argue that Feng Shui is wellness,
Mm-hmm.
has an
Mm-hmm.
aspect of that. And but specifically, like commercially, it's been in play for quite a while. If you think about, spas and wellness centers and retreat centers and yoga, and those are typically spaces where wellness occurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that, just because that building has a wellness purpose doesn't necessarily mean that it was constructed with wellness practices in mind,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially, 20 years ago. If you go to a spa that was built 20 years ago, there was a lot less knowledge about material health back then
Right.
than there is today.
Mm-hmm.
So, however, when you're thinking about like a single family residence, and you're thinking about a wellness property, home detox, healthy home, that's also been in play for decades,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with people who are highly sensitive. So they're either
Mm-hmm.
highly sensitive to chemicals,
Mm-hmm.
smells, or excuse me, or energetically.
Mm-hmm.
So that's um, that's one way that wellness in real estate has been coming in, is as far as residential, people who are concerned about those aspects of the home. So single
Mm-hmm.
family residential. And
Mm-hmm.
then more recently, it's been with wellness communities. So specific communities being built, which would be like agri-hoods,
Mm-hmm.
communities built around farming,
Mm-hmm.
communities built with different, again, wellness, maybe resources or amenities involved.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
walking trails and bike trails, ponds, plenty of outdoor access, community interaction and events, or things for elderly people aging in place. So that's kind of how it's broken down into, commercial aspects,
Mm-hmm.
and then, single family residential, kind of looking more at the health, the impacts on the occupants. And then with more of these community-based living situations that have popped up maybe in the last, 10, 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
they become more
Mm-hmm.
popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
So, yeah, you are a licensed real estate agent, as I
I
am,
am.
and that's one of the reasons why we connected. So, tell me how you are integrating some of those principles, and you have a lot of qualification in terms of what would make you a wellness consultant or wellness design consultant.
Mm.
So, you can tell me about some of the the principles and practices that you are incorporating in your business.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So wellness real estate is the transaction of these
Mm-hmm.
properties, and wellness
Right.
design is actually the creation of these properties. So
Mm-hmm.
with that, I've spent more than half of my life studying and practicing different wellness modalities, from yoga to Reiki, and sound. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
I do use sound as a therapeutic modality. So, and then my shamanic practices. And I wanted to see how I could apply those things to the built environment to help,
Mm-hmm.
improve and support health and wellness on a larger
Mm-hmm.
scale,
Mm-hmm.
physically, and a larger time scale. So in addition to that, then I'm a Feng Shui practitioner, and then I've studied all the wellness building standards, the two bigger ones that are applicable here in the United States, which is Well and Fit Well. So it's really a comprehensive. I mean, if you want to throw around the word holistic, it really is a holistic
Yeah.
practice in terms of looking at a space and how you can support the occupant's health. If you're looking at a
Mm-hmm.
commercial space, it's a little bit more looking of, kind of larger patterns. What is the activity that's supposed to be in the space? How can you support the activity, and what are some of the potential typical imbalances that happen in that type of workplace or that type of commercial space or something like that. So it
Mm-hmm.
really ranges from, literally the nuts and bolts of, looking at a building, the materials, the operations of it and the utilities of it, looking at air quality and health quality, air quality and water quality. What is the lighting?
Mm-hmm.
What are the acoustics
Mm-hmm.
like? How is that impacting health? What are the sensitivities of the audience? Is it in a healthcare situation? So there's so many different impacts. There's so many different variables, but there are some larger principles too. Like everybody should have proper air quality and
Mm-hmm.
proper water filtration. So,
Mm-hmm.
those are a couple of the basics. The
Mm-hmm.
less toxics we're using in materials, the better. Like
Yeah.
that's always going to be a big driver. One thing where usually in terms of sustainability and in terms of wellness, things are very aligned. However, um, sometimes where wellness considerations can deviate from sustainability is just because a product is recycled doesn't mean that it's good for your health.
Right.
You
Right.
really have to look then at the content of what is this recycled material. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's great to reuse fly ash. Fly ash is a carcinogen. So we don't want fly ash in places where it's going to be, inhaled.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of, look at that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But there really are so many different interventions that you can use, and really based on what the client's needs are, what the client's interests are, or what are some of the just general imbalances that can happen.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it sounds very holistic. It's very comprehensive what you're talking about. It's not just the material, it's the energy, it's the air, it's the water. And I really appreciate that. And one of the reasons why I asked you to get on my podcast was to talk about feng shui, and because you're the only person that I know of who is licensed as an agent and practicing feng shui.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I know a lot of feng shui practitioners, but so I don't, it sounds like your knowledge and your expertise is much wider than just feng shui, but I just kind of like to talk to you a little bit about the feng shui part. So
Mhm.
tell me about the feng shui that you practice. I know there are many different sects and different schools, and how do you see feng shui impacting in the practice of real estate business?
Yeah, I practice mostly landform feng shui, which is
Mhm.
which is the original style of feng shui, because you're
Mhm.
looking at the land and how the land and nature is
Mhm.
impacting the site, the occupants, and the building. So I always add a component of that, include a component of that. And then my training is mostly in BTB feng shui,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
is very commonly practiced in the West. And
Mhm.
there's a few differences between BTB feng shui and then compass school. So
Mhm.
BTB, we don't use a compass.
Mhm.
We always align the bagua which is that 9 square grid that you use to map out a property. We always align the bagua to the entrance of a property, which I've heard that's how it was used back in landform days, because they were looking at the landforms and they weren't using a compass. So I feel it's a very intuitive way of looking at a space if you're entering through the water section, essentially. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of great benefits of compass method as well. It's just not what I practice at the moment. So, and it's really applicable, I think, especially to buyers who are very interested in Feng Shui. No matter what I do, whether it's wellness design, whether it's real estate, people know I'm a Feng Shui practitioner. I'm always going to add some layer of Feng Shui to it, because for me, it's an assessment method. Looking at the elemental processes, looking at the relationship of elements, elemental composition of the people who are living there, the buyers, and seeing like where are the elements located on the property. So that for me, that's an integral part of my process, which whether people want it or not, that's how I do things. That's how I think about things. I also I studied Ayurveda for a while as well. So looking at things in terms of the elements and elemental balances, it's been used for thousands and thousands of years successfully. So I'm going to go with that. And it's, for me, it's very logical. So that's a huge part of Feng Shui, is considering the elements.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating though that both Feng Shui and Ayurveda, they're like thousands of history, and now we're talking in 2023, and in the last 3 years, because of the pandemic, the health element in our life has become so much more important for so many people. And now we're, and the well design and the well certificate and fit well, both of them have been around for some time, like not as long as Feng Shui or Ayurveda, obviously, but in the more recent years it came about. And I just find it fascinating that it's finally like we're finally looking at that whole like that living, that built environment, so in the holistic manner. And I find it quite fascinating and actually exciting. We're living in a very exciting time. And so can you tell me a little bit about the land formation principles?
Yeah, so that's something that I get really excited about. I love nature. I love being outside. I love hiking. I love going on road trips and looking at different landforms. And in this day and age, we're also looking at urban design features as well, because we live a lot. It's a lot more likely that people are going to be surrounded by houses and roads than they are going to be surrounded by rivers and mountains and things. So if you are surrounded by rivers and mountains, that's very lucky. That's fantastic. That's very beneficial. So Feng Shui is all about energy flowing through a space. So even your experience or any listener's experience, what is your experience of standing near a mountain and looking at that mountain versus what is your experience of standing near a stream and looking at that stream and spending time near that stream? So that said, what is that mountain like? Is that mountain crumbling? Does it have really sharp peaks? There's a lot of variations within that mountain. Do you feel, I had a client who, she had a pretty good size backyard, but their view in the back was a beautiful hill, but it had a lot of big boulders that kind of looked like they might, in an earthquake, a couple of those could have fallen, could potentially fall down and roll close to their property. So right there, on some subtle level, like your brain is always picking up patterns and significances and making connections with things. So whether you consciously look at that mountain and you say that hillside in your backyard and you're like, okay, there's plenty of space for any of these boulders to roll down and it's not going to hit my house. It's not going to, come into my yard. But on some subtle level, you're considering that, right? So there's some subtle level of consideration of that happening. And, at the end of the day, we have a very strong fight or flight response. So that's how we've survived for so many years. So on some level, our body is going to be picking up that cue. The same thing of, a river. So if you're near a river, is it rushing? Are there rapids? Like that's much, much different energy than a stream. So
Mm-hmm.
now equate that to buildings. So the building next to you, is the building next to you crumbling down? Is it dilapidated? The house, is it in good health? I mean, that's your neighbor. So on some level, you are um, you're getting an aspect of that energy every
Yeah.
time you approach it or every time you
Right.
pass it. Is it a rushing street that's going past your house? Do you live near the 101? Or do you live, so that's all a part of landform feng shui, is
Mm-hmm.
looking at all these elements. And I usually zoom out to like a 2 mile area. So I
Mm-hmm.
look for impacts from a 2 mile area, and then I start to go in and then I look at the neighborhood and what the neighbors
Mm-hmm.
are like. So
Mm-hmm.
some things you can change and some things you can't. So if
Mm-hmm.
it's a residence, for example, if a client is looking for a home, and this is where um, the variable of the clients is coming in as well. So
Right.
do they have lowered chi? Are they a little bit more susceptible and sensitive to
Mm.
impacts of things, or
Mm-hmm.
do they have really strong chi, and are they
Mm-hmm.
really healthy and robust? Because maybe some things aren't going to impact them as much as
Mm.
they're going to impact somebody else.
Right.
So and that's and again that kind of plays in with sensitivity. And then you're kind of throwing also into the equation, what is this person's elemental constitution? Are they a wood
Mm.
type? Are they a water type? Are they a metal type? I've actually had sound clients who the sound of water stressed them out
Oh,
because
wow.
yeah. So they would have, you know, nightmares surrounding water or drowning or something like
Oh.
that. So
Mm.
typically people think of streams as being relaxing and water being
Mm-hmm.
relaxing,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always maybe the off chance that one
Mm-hmm.
of these things is a trigger for them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's general properties, there's general principles that you can apply, but there's always going to be variations within that,
Mm-hmm.
including what are the clients like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, so when you're working with a buyer or working with somebody who's looking, um, it'll be easy to say, okay, maybe this isn't the right place for you, or maybe the angle of this home isn't right. But what if you have a seller, or what if you have a client who's staying and um, say you have a house that is backed against a mountain or hill or something. Is there any way that you can remedy with your practice? Like what do you offer to remedy that?
Yeah, I'm really big on remedies. And I think in most cases, many things can be remedied.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
Mm-hmm.
depending upon, like, if you notice that a client has a certain pattern in their life,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see that pattern being repeated in
Mm.
the home that they're
Right.
looking for, you
Yeah.
can strongly recommend to get, like, let's say you have a client that's been divorced 3 times. The
Uh-huh.
home that they're looking at has some male female imbalance, and there's like a big missing area
Oh,
in
interesting.
in the male or female side. You can say, um, I'm not going to tell you not to buy the house. I would strongly recommend against it, because what I see is you're picking out to continue this pattern. That may or may not
Mm.
be the case, but since they
Mm-hmm.
have a pattern in this, and then this house that they did choose is essentially continuing the same pattern, that
Wow.
is that, so there's cases where it's like, definitely do not buy this. I recently
Mm-hmm.
saw, I don't know, maybe um, I don't know if you saw this, but recently there was a home that was sold in Alhambra for like 130 over asking, that's built on a bridge.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So if I had a client I would probably strongly recommend against buying that home, because you're having rushing water
It
underneath
was
you being,
built over a river?
yeah, it's
Oh,
literally
wow.
built on a bridge. So in certain cases, there's really challenging, it's a
Uh-huh.
really challenging situation to remedy.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
can very strongly recommend against it. But a lot of times there are a lot of, whether it's a transcendental cure, that's another thing that
Mm-hmm.
BTB does, BTB Feng
Mm-hmm.
Shui does, it's what's called transcendental cures that are more like symbolic or
Mm-hmm.
energetic cures that are
Mm-hmm.
done to a
Mm-hmm.
space. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, in this client that I mentioned that had the hill behind
Mm-hmm.
and these
Mm-hmm.
boulders that were kind of sticking out of the hillside,
Right.
um, and the boulders aren't going to hit their house. Like
Right.
it's not going to happen. So
Yeah.
in that case, like 99%, it's not going to happen. In that
Mm-hmm.
case, I would maybe do an energetic cure. So,
Mm.
and this is kind of where it goes into maybe a little, borderline. People think it's new age or something like that. But for them, yeah, it's symbolic. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, when we're seeing something symbolic, it's over repetition, it's going to create a new neural pathway in our
Right.
brain. So
Right.
it does, even though it's like could be considered woo woo, like putting
Mm-hmm.
crystals in your backyard or
Mm-hmm.
something, or putting symbolic boulders in your backyard or planting trees, even
Yeah.
though physically they might not stop the boulder. Again, like the boulder probably wouldn't even reach the property, but it's going to give this client a sense of being protected. It's going to give them a sense of there being some barrier
Mm-hmm.
between them and these boulders. So
Mm-hmm.
worst case, boulders come down, maybe the trees fall, and it wasn't like a physical barrier for them. It gave
Mm-hmm.
them this underlying sense of
Mm-hmm.
protection. So,
Right.
so whether it's like, adding some landscaping, so visually you're channeling or you're channeling some energy into a different space, or painting a
Mm-hmm.
wall, or
Mm-hmm.
adding different elements somewhere. There's a lot of modifications that can be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So feng shui is like really it's not a set rule. Like for instance, like the homes that you're talking about, the one over the bridge or one with the boulders. I mean, it could be if the resident have different elements, composition. So it'll vary from home to home and person to person, right?
Mhm.
So isn't that interesting that it could be a perfect house for somebody, but it could not be, a perfect house for somebody else, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Precisely.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And all the things that you're talking about are, it's nowadays we in this wellness real estate or regenerative real estate, we talk about biophilic design, that is the natural patterns or natural elements. All of that is really ingrained in feng shui and some of the very old traditions. So how did you like manage to incorporate all that, and what was your impetus and like getting into all this stuff? What got you into all this stuff? I'm just curious personally.
I mean, it's kind of just like well, first of all, the thought just dropped in my lap.
Mm,
I love working with sound. I've always been interested in architecture and design, and just been
mhm,
very, I'll always, you know, look at interior design and
mhm,
the shapes of spaces, and then of course
mhm,
my big affinity with nature. So
mhm,
after working with individuals and small groups for so long, and
mhm,
then I thought I would really like to, it's great to help people, um, in a 1 or 2 hour session, but it would be really fantastic to help support people in a space that they're staying for,
mm,
5 to 40 years, whatever, or
yeah,
or in public spaces,
yeah,
commercial spaces where people spend a lot of time. And this was
yeah,
this is before COVID.
yeah,
So then I started working with an architect, and I realized, like, oh, I didn't know about the building standards. I wasn't aware of well or fit well. I'd
mm-hmm,
always been interested in feng shui, so I had dabbled in
mm-hmm,
that in the past because it was very in line with the other practices that I had
right,
done.
right.
So that was kind of it. And then you're just, you catch the golden thread and you start pulling it, and things, other things start falling into your path. And
Yeah,
um, and I feel so much of it is connected. I feel like,
mm-hmm,
you
I
know, yeah, feng shui and shamanism are deeply connected because it's all
yeah,
about looking at the land and reading the land, and
mm-hmm.
the energy of the land and spaces and people. Um, so a lot of it is just very congruent with other things that I've
Yeah, I
practiced in the past.
agree. I agree. And what is your vision of your business? And how would you like to grow your business? Like we talked about this, how do we really help humanity to achieve the true wellness homes and healthy homes? It's not just being green and sustainable. It's much more than that. It's much more comprehensive and complex.
Mhm.
How do you envision our this field of what we call real estate and what we call wellness design or green or sustainable, regenerative? There's all these words floating around these days. What is your vision, Elle?
Um, I'd like to have a full service wellness
Mm-hmm.
real estate and design consultancy, and have staff and somebody who's dedicated on material health, a couple people
Mm-hmm.
who are dedicated to material health and people who are dedicated to working with biophilic design, and just work with a host of architects and developers and owners who are renovating or looking for spaces. Also my sound background,
Mm-hmm.
I really think about the sound of spaces as well. So
Mm-hmm.
things like audio programs for
Mm-hmm.
commercial spaces or hotels, things like
Mm-hmm.
that, designing soundscapes. And then uh, we do a lot of work with rocks. We go rock hounding, and my husband is into lapidary. So even
Oh,
like even like charged objects for the home.
yeah.
So getting into some, small home goods that are very kind of, with intention and
Mm-hmm.
natural materials, and
Mm-hmm.
and I even do that with clients. Like I'll find something somewhere and I'll hold on to it for them, and then give it to them or sell it to them or something like that. So I do that on a small
Yeah.
scale already, just like little prescriptions for the home.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, really working to and spreading the word as well, an educational aspect, because
Yeah.
there's so much
Yeah.
of this that is really, really useful even for owners who aren't going to hire a consultant, but there's a lot of really good resources. So I think just distilling some of those things and making it really accessible for people.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
Obviously one of my big one important thing to me is elemental balancing, and I think that's such a logical system for
Mm-hmm.
people to use and apply on a
Mm-hmm.
daily basis for
Mm-hmm.
relationships and understanding themselves. So I'm actually working on a course in that. um,
Mm.
yeah, and I think it's really helpful for architects and designers for material selection as well, to kind of
Mm-hmm.
understand the
Mm-hmm.
energetic properties of the materials and what the
Mm-hmm.
representations are.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that the principles like in certification, like fit well and well, do you feel like a lot of it is overlapping with the principles of feng shui, biophilic design? Because I haven't studied well or what fit well myself. I have all kinds of other certifications, but those are the ones that I haven't. Do you see that like all these traditional philosophies? I don't know if we call it philosophies, feng shui practices that have been around for thousands of years. Do you think that are finally now being accepted into this Western or modern culture, and people are recognizing the necessity of really looking at those elements in our life because now we spend so much time at home or indoor? What is your take?
So yeah, so Well and Fitwell, they both incorporate biophilic design, which is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. So they
Yeah.
they have modules that include biophilic design. They're both very comprehensive systems. They
Mm.
deal with everything. I think they're really, really good frameworks to use, whether or not you're actually going to apply for the
Mm-hmm.
certification.
Mm-hmm.
They're fantastic frameworks to use, and all the information is like pretty much free online. You can download the standards and you can download like the
Right.
checklist to get
Mm-hmm.
into the standards. So
Mm-hmm.
those are fantastic. Neither one of them really incorporate feng shui, and sometimes feng shui is a little bit of a harder sell to
Yeah.
architects and designers because they're like, oh my god, you're going to tell me how to shape things and how to do things, and they some of them kind of like you know get a short back when
Yes.
they're when the clients say that they want to bring in a feng shui consultant. But
Yeah.
I think there's definitely certain feng shui principles and concepts that can and should be used throughout architecture. One of them
Mm-hmm.
is door swing. So you might not consider what direction the door is swinging or how it's opening into a room, but it
Uh-huh.
can be a really easy way to change an occupant's experience of going through a
Right.
space. Like
Yeah.
I'll go through architectural plans and just like mark down like the door swings that need to be changed
Mm-hmm.
because they're opening up to like the small view of a room. Like you don't want to
Mm.
open up you don't want to open up the door to your bedroom and be looking at a wall.
Yeah.
Like what is your experience? Like you're getting a short-sighted view every time you look
Right.
into your room. So that's a lot of times something that I have to remedy
Ah,
in a
interesting.
space. Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
they're, or your office, you're opening up
Mm-hmm.
the door and right away you're looking into the wall where the view of the office is over here. So again, symbolism. What is the symbolism of this? Every time you walk into the office, you're running into the wall, or you're
Right,
looking into
right.
the wall. You have a short view, you have a short perspective. So if 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 all architects and designers understood or thought about that when they were drawing in the doors and which way the door would
Yeah.
swing, like that would be
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And then we're always
Mm-hmm.
looking at like this beautiful open view of a room when we're entering it.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So there's a few feng shui principles that are just what I think are kind of no-brainers that are
Mm-hmm.
just only supplement design, and it's really not going to impact the
Mm-hmm.
creativity, of
Mm-hmm.
the design
Mm-hmm.
or anything.
Yeah.
But again, because of some of the customization and the preferences and the needs of the individuals, there's not so many standard feng shui things that you can apply. A handful of
Mm-hmm.
them,
Yeah.
and then you get into the whole, is it BTB or is it compass method? So people thinking, oh, this is always good in the north, and it's like, okay, well, is that BTB or is that compass method? And really, is it always going to be good in the north? So that's kind of a wild card as well.
Yeah, it's really complex, isn't it? But it's I think once you start to look at the holistic view of this whole idea of what makes a nice home, like healthy, home, it gets really complex and deep. So that's why we need people like you.
Thank you. Yeah, and at the same time, it can also be very logical, because
Mm-hmm.
feng shui is based on the natural world, the
Mm-hmm.
interaction of the natural world, and the operation of the natural world and the flow of energy. So,
Yeah.
um, but our life is very complex, so that makes it much more complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
5,000 years ago, it was
Yeah.
much less complex
Yeah.
than it is now. Yeah.
Exactly. So tell us how we can find you. How can people reach out to you?
So my website is heare.la. And I'm actually in the process of splitting out a separate one for architects and designers, because that's a
Mm.
different field, but you'll be able to find everything there. So it's heare.la.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the name of my business, and that's basically here, like HERE as in space and HEAR as in sound, kind of just combine the two. And
Mm-hmm.
on Instagram, for this aspect, it's HEARE_agency,
Okay.
AGENCY.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would make sure to put that in the show
But then
note.
if you look up L. Larson, you'll find me, because there's not very many of us
That's
going
right.
around.
Thank you so much, Elle. This is so much fun. I mean, you have such an abundant, rich knowledge of all these different principles and traditions from all over the world, really. Like you have the shamanism, and you have the Feng Shui and Ayurveda, and and of course the Western, the well and well fit well, and all these other credentials that makes you very unique and very valuable, I think. So
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
yeah,
much.
thank you so much for sharing this information. And I love to work with you on some projects.
Yeah, that'll be a blast, because
Yeah.
you're a sustainability expert, and that's like,
Mhm.
that's something that I don't have expertise in. So
Well, I can't really say that myself, but I have different set of certification than you do. So,
mhm,
we can complement each other. But
complimentary,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elle, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Azumi. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. This was Izumi Tanaka with Home Green Homes podcast. Until the next episode.